Hi, I'm Rob Vanstone, and welcome to the 27th Rider Rumblings video podcast. I had Mark Melnichuk actually tabulate the total so that I'm not guessing. I've been advertising it as a leader post Philharmonic Orchestra. I've been lying. I asked. The intro music is actually by Brad Stones, and it's called All Star. So
Smash Mouth has a song named All Star too from Shrek, I think.
Must be a ballad. Smash Mouth.
Yeah.
For Murray McCormick, my worthy constituent, is with us once again.
He votes for you.
Pleasure to be here.
And the great Mitchell Blair.
How are you, Rob?
Good to see you. Thank you
Murray,
so much.
how's it going?
Geez, we're not that far away, Mitch. Good.
Well, that's our show for today.
Yeah.
I think we're going to talk about the Rough Riders. There's so many areas that we could explore. So if you could be with us for the next 2 or 3 hours, that would be appreciated. Start, I guess, with Sunday and then look ahead to next year. Hopefully I get there. I need to diet. Murray, preliminarily, what are your thoughts on where they were or where they are after Sunday's game?
Well, I think Sunday's game was a perfect example of what we've been going through all season. The offense was kind of ineffective. The defense and special teams both performed admirably, not strong enough, and the Riders lost. So one game can be a microcosm of the season, which is a word that's been used a lot this last couple of days, and I think that's exactly what it was. Where they go from here, one spot. They got to get a quarterback. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. They can't go for a guy like they tried Zach Claris. His injury history kind of cut back to bite him in the butt, but going nowhere, they got to go get a quarterback.
Mitch?
Well, you win as a team, you lose as a team. And, well, a lot of heat's being put on Brandon Bridge, and for good reason. Brandon Bridge was not the sole reason why the Saskatchewan-Roughriders lost that game.
He was a symptom of the problem.
He was. We're not going to argue that, but the defense didn't get any turnovers. There were no real big plays for the Saskatchewan-Roughriders, and you need to have that, whether it be a playoff game or any game. And that just didn't happen for whatever reason. Obviously, I don't know about you guys, but when Brandon Bridge threw that duck in the second quarter that was intercepted by Kevin Fogg, and it turned into a couple plays later, the Drew Wolotarski touchdown, I went, I don't know if the Riders can come back from this, because they just didn't have that juice, as Sam McGuavin said after the game. They just didn't have that energy. So where do we go from here? Well, I agree with you, Murray. I think a new quarterback is needed, but I'm going to go further. I think the Saskatchewan Roughriders and the Canadian Football League as a whole are going to have a very different look in 2019, just for the fact that we've got a new CBA that has to be worked out. And I think what is a bigger threat is the fact that the Alliance of American Football is coming. And I think that a lot of these players, not only here, but across the league who are going to be free agents, are going to be checking out that new league because it's home for them. And it's a closer path to the NFL, more money, less games. Chris Jones alluded to it in his postseason news conference that it's getting tougher to find players. I think the CFL is going to look a lot different next year because of what's going on around it.
You look at the imperative of the Rough Riders finding a quarterback, you factor in the new league, and those teams are all going to be looking for American quarterbacks too. So it's really a tough time, a tough juncture for the Rough Riders when they have that cavernous void as they've had before, and there's more of a demand for quarterbacks than ever. You look at the National Football League, Derek Anderson and Nathan Peterman started for the Buffalo Bills this year. So you even see it in the NFL. So how does that trickle down and affect the Rough Riders?
Yeah, I don't know. And I do agree that, quarterbacks are needed, and you need to develop a quarterback. And that's the thing is, you're going to have to go out. This Rider team was 12-6. They're on the verge of doing some great things. If Chris Jones can keep some of these guys around, and that's going to be the biggest thing of all. But where do you get a quarterback? And is David Watford still part of this equation? And do you feel you can groom David Watford to be the next Darian Durant? Because they haven't groomed a quarterback since Darian Durant was here. So if you're going to put that on Watford, then you have to go out and find a young quarterback. But like you said, Rob, with so many leagues out there now, and the NFL's looking for guys, the AAF's looking for guys, the XFL is coming up, the CFL is going to become an option for American players that I don't know if they're going to want to take it. And I asked Chris Jones, how do you get these guys up here? And I just think at the end of the day, the fact you can stay at home, you can make more money, play less games, that's attractive enough for me.
When the USFL was around, they seemed to help themselves to, they developed some quarterbacks. There was Bobby Hebert, of course, he signed Doug Flutie. Jim Kelly came up through that system, etc. Steve Young. But they also went with some NFL retreads. They had, the Chuck Fusinas of the world, John Reeves, Brian Sipe. So they weren't necessarily plucking these young quarterbacks and monopolizing that market. But I think this model is going to be different. And I think they're going to, by and large, use the younger quarterbacks. And that's going to really, I think, affect the player pool of quarterbacks a lot more than the USFL did.
Well, most of the quarterbacks end up in the CFL a little bit older than the 24 and 25-year-old guys too, though, by the time they get any good. So I think that maybe help them a little bit. I don't know how kind of the age things. You mentioned developing a quarterback. It's so hard to develop a quarterback in the CFL. You're at every practice with me. There's only so much time. The starter gets the reps, the backup gets the next ones, and the third guy gets whatever's left over. So to develop a quarterback is really hard. I don't know how teams do it. The good teams seem to do that, and that's a big issue. But the Riders have to do that. I think the new football league is going to be impactful. I also think the CBA is going to be impactful. Yep. Players are talking about health insurance. They're talking about raises and salaries. They like, I think they like the idea of the 3 bye weeks. I don't think that'll be a big negotiation, but there's a lot of issues. And, can the players afford to strike or to hold out at the beginning of the season? I don't think so. But if there's more money out there with the TSN contract and the players aren't sharing in that pool, an example is a lot of these guys make the minimum of $55,000. I think Lewis Ward and Brett Lau, they're two of the best kickers in the game, both made the minimum. How do you have your two contributors like that?
But that being said, Murray,
somebody's going to make a minimum, whatever it is.
Yeah, Lewis Ward was a rookie. Brett Lau, they basically didn't have a lot of playing experience. So I agree with you as far as guys getting the minimum. But if Lewis Ward and Brett Lau were to be free agents, they would be getting a lot more than $55,000 after the seasons they had.
Let's face it, though, CFLPA is a traditionally weak union.
Yes.
And it will be a weak union. It might be a little stronger, but it will ultimately have no choice but to capitulate. You look at the composition of the union, it's heavily weighted toward Canadian offensive linemen. Yeah. You look at the American-Canadian influence in the union, and roughly half of the brethren grow up never wanting to be part of the CFL Players Association. They want to play in the NFL. So there's no built-in loyalty to this union. And I think it's going to be fragmented at best by sheer virtue of its composition. They might be able to maintain some solidarity for a while, but ultimately there will be fissures. And at that point, it cracks. So it's just a matter of how long does it take to get the CBA negotiated and how far do you go. But ultimately, this union is not going to be strong enough to mount the kind of offensive that it really should be able to.
And the CFL's fired the first salvo in this by saying you can't sign any guys to bonuses in the offseason. Right. So here's a guy, the $5,000 bonus is pretty significant to him getting through an offseason, and they can't sign him now. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen with all these quarterbacks that are out there with the CBA open? Is we going to be May 15th? They finally reach an agreement.
But free agency is February 15th, so teams don't even know what they can spend.
Mike Riley has already said he is not going to sign with a team until the new CBA has been established. So you can sit there on February 15th and go, where's Mike Riley going? Until Mike Riley knows what the new CBA is all about, he's not going anywhere.
The deadline's got to be February 15th from a practical perspective. But that didn't work out in 2014. And
there was an interesting point that Marcus Thigpen signed just because he got the money he figured he could get under the new agreement, is basically what he said. So some players may look at this saying, I can get $70,000 under the old agreement. That's good enough for me.
However, though, when I look at that,
quarterback when you can make.
When I look at that, though, I wonder how attractive, and nothing against Marcus Thigpen, but Marcus Thigpen's in his 30s and probably knows that the interest level in the AAF, his days in the NFL are done because he's over 30, and NFL teams don't like to get guys over the age of 30, especially at the running back position. So Marcus Thigpen probably knows that this is where his bread and butter is. So yeah, he might as well sign now and go from there. But you're right, at other positions. If Jordan Williams-Lambert was a free agent, Jordan Williams-Lambert would probably be heading south of the border, get some NFL interest. He'd be making more than $55,000 because he would have played for the minimum. As I said, I just think this is going to be an off-season unlike any off-season we've seen in the CFL, because there are so many things that are happening sort of outside the game itself. And the other thing is, and Chris Jones alluded to this yesterday, the fact now with this salary cap for the coaches and the personnel, and the fact that they don't get to have any more mini camps. I don't understand why the CFL is trying to drain talent away at a time when they should be trying to attract it.
Well, it's the CFL, so that explains a lot of it just as a blanket condemnation.
There's no proof out there, but a lot of these rules are targeted towards the Rough Riders. I think Chris Jones was asked of that because Chris Jones has mini camps every weekend from now until this main camp opens. Yep. And they have the money and they can afford to do that. They can afford to do those kind of things. So some of these salary cap management things I think are aimed at the Rough Riders. Chris Jones too. Having 15 to 16 coaches, unofficially or officially, a staff, many people. You look at their webpage compared to other teams, they have way more staff. So this is a way to bring in the Rough Riders. Maybe they bring their spending in line so it'll make a more level playing field. I don't know if I agree with it. I think if you have the money, why not? It's not as if the Riders had more mini camps in the last 3 years than any of the league, all the league combined. And where are the Riders right now? They're out of the playoffs. So it doesn't necessarily guarantee you anything.
You need some cost certainty in a league of this dimension, though.
Yeah,
I don't know what the NFL, if they have a cap for coaches and stuff like that. And I'd have to go and take a look, how many assistants do the Seahawks have? How many do the Broncos have? How many do the Patriots have?
Not as many as
not
college.
Very good ones in Denver.
Not as many as the college teams.
No, but what I'm saying is I don't really, if you've got the money to have these guys, why should that be a detriment? If the money isn't there, and yes, I understand that you want to have a level playing field, but as you just said, Murray, you're having these mini camps every weekend. It's not guaranteeing you a championship, and the Saskatchewan Roughriders are on the outside looking in, coming into the conference final weekend. So did they get players from these camps? Yes, they did. Did it push them over the top to a championship? No, it didn't. So why are we having this fight, as I said, with the CFL, to seemingly not attract players and drain the talent that they've got?
I thought Arash made some really good points in the sports cage yesterday, talking about this cap and how it, like it or not, it also extends further than it should when you look at the medical personnel and trainers, and a league that is talking about player safety yet scrimping on that end of it. Mm-hmm. I don't know why non-football ops personnel are included in a cap that should be for football ops. But I understand why there's a cap. If you look at this league, it's not as well heeled as the National Football League, obviously. And it's had its financial challenges, and it still does. And there's some troubled franchises, even though the league as a whole is strong. So you can't get too extravagant and you can't get too greedy when you're the Canadian Football League, because it could fall apart on you. What if, in an instant, what if Bob Wettenhall woke up tomorrow morning and decided, I don't feel like doing this anymore? What if
Dave... I mean, he's not doing that now?
Well, what if he felt like, said, I'm not going to own the Alouettes anymore? It's not a very viable business. If you look at the benevolent owners that the Argonauts have had, what if they woke up one day and said, forget it? What if Bob Young decided he didn't want to lose money anymore? What if Dave Braley got sick of it, and suddenly 4 out of your 9 teams are on very precarious ground? So they don't have that foundation like the National Football League does, where you can have that largesse, because there's still a lot of areas that are kind of sparklers right now that could turn into brush fires. So you need some check on the excesses, and I think that is good. But it goes too far. As Arash pointed out yesterday, I don't understand why so many things that shouldn't be factored into this are.
Well, here's the other thing as well. Yesterday as well on the cage, it was brought up about this cap. Mark Trestman has been fired in Toronto. Mark Trestman, $600,000 a year. Does that money that he has to get paid next year go to this cap? Because if it does, the Argonauts are already hamstrung. Is that the reason why Jason Moss stays in Edmonton? Is that the reason Kavis Reed and Mike Sherman are staying in Montreal? Because if it is, are you really doing the league and those clubs a favor?
I asked Craig Reynolds about that at the Rider annual meeting not long after this cap was announced. And I said, what if you faced a situation again, such as that with Greg Marshall, such as that with Brendan Tamman and Corey Chamberlain? Would those remaining obligations be factored into the cap? And I forget the precise phrasing, but he said there's a way to kind of account for those without it being an albatross hanging over the team, because you don't want to compound the situation where a team reaches a point where it feels it needs a change, and then it's encumbered by a cap where you can't go and pay decent money to get somebody to replace it. So you don't want to double whammy these teams. So there's kind of a way to slip that under the table, and maybe there's a bit of dead money, but not much is my understanding. But
the thing is, the ones who are impacted a lot by this, everyone's impacted a lot. It's going to be the little guys, like the equipment managers, the trainers, and all those guys. They're taking a 10%.
Chris Jones will still get a huge salary.
Chris Jones is probably taking the biggest pay cut of all compared to his salary, because he's 10%.
He'll still get lots of dough.
He'll still be fine, and that's fine. But it's going to be the little guys.
But you can say that about a lot of coaches and general managers in the league.
And Chris Jones made a good point yesterday. He says, what about the guys coming into the league, like the young assistant linebacker coach? How are they going to get them up here if you can't pay them because you only have so many coaches? So where's the world of like refilling these voids of taking over for other coaches? So where are they going to get?
And they got no pensions in any of that already.
No.
Chris Jones is trying to find the next Chris Jones. Don Matthews bought Chris Jones into this league. Chris Jones worked himself up to be arguably the top head coach in this league. And I know you could make some arguments with Dave Dickinson and some of the others that are out there, Trustman. And I realize, after going from a Grey Cup to being fired. But now Chris Jones wants to find the next Chris Jones. And he can't do it because of what the CFL has said. And that's too bad, because in 10 years, we might have that guy that could be the next Chris Jones, but because the league says, nope, we can't afford that, that's not going to happen.
Can I offer a little different take here? With all these new leagues coming in, the AFL and the XFL, do you know who keeps standing up when they're gone? Is the CFL. For some reason, it's, in spite of all its foibles, the things, all the darts that are thrown out from the United States, they go and they hide, and the CFL comes out of there, and the players still come back up here. I think Chris Jones mentioned the length and how long the CFL is going to be around and how he's got to be a better salesman. So they got to sell the fact that you're going to be with this team, and guess what? You're going to get paid. There's not going to be a chance that whatever happens down in this AAF league, you may not get paid. You may not get health care while you're injured. So the CFL, maybe we're underselling the product of the CFL and the stability of that in this world. But I also know staying at home and making more money is important. But when you talk to some of these guys, it's a pretty cool place to be in the CFL, and maybe it's an option. I just throwing that out there.
And Willie Jefferson did bring that up yesterday.
Yeah.
And he said, you know what, Saskatchewan could be my home. And he's obviously got a very solid relationship with Chris Jones. But when I asked Willie about the NFL, he said, yeah, it's an option. I have to look at it. And why wouldn't I look at it? And you would have to think, after the season that he had, that he'll get interest from the NFL. I would think that the AAF is probably clamoring to get guys like Willie Jefferson. And as I said, if you can play less games, make more money than what you're doing in the CFL, American money, good point. And what did Willie joke on that yesterday?
Yeah,
he said he went to switch his money around. Yeah, he went to switch his money around. I was like, where's the rest of it?
Yeah.
You're right, Murray. The CFL has survived a lot of these leagues that have come through, like the USFL, the XFL. But that was then, and this is now, and it's a different climate. It's a different environment. I think we'll always have a CFL. It's just what type of talent will be in that CFL, and that's what scares me.
Why not put the salary management system will save it? Don't worry about that.
Why not accentuate the C in CFL? You're putting so much time and many resources into mining the United States, and now there's going to be even more people mining the United States. Do you really need that many American players, honestly?
Oh yeah, Rob, I think.
Do you really need them?
What kind of game?
Rob,
do we have?
I go to a Rams game. I go to a Canada West game.
I know,
and I'm entertained.
I know exactly where you're coming from. Well, that's because of the idiot sitting beside you in the press box is why you're entertained.
We wrecked one Rams game this year. Sorry to Glenn Hoffman.
That was good. That was even unrehearsed.
It's our choir.
There you go.
You guys want to get a room? Are you okay?
No, we're okay.
We're very close.
But I agree with you, Rob. And doing Rams games on CKRM, I see that talent that Canada West has. And there are guys that won't play another game that have graduated from Canada West. And you know where I'm going with this one. Noah Picton, obviously. Yeah. We talk about quarterbacks.
Is Atlee Simon going to get a chance?
I think Atlee Simon will get a chance with the Calgary Stampeders. I really do.
What about Cole Benkick? Guys like that?
No, I don't. I don't know if Danny Nesbitt will get a shot. And I go back to Rams in the past years and even back to days when I was doing the games at another radio station in town. There were other guys that never, ever got a chance. A guy like Matt Dean, the defensive back, he never got a chance. Shane Ostapowicz, he never got a chance. That guy had hands like... He had Claremont hands.
Ryan Shinbine.
Ryan Shinbine's another guy. Like, there are a lot of guys out there.
They can play.
Yes.
So why are you bringing in Joe Nobody from Tuskegee
Because if nobody's
Institute?
going to go to the Rams games, Rob, as you and I both tried to get people to, they're not going to go to these games. Because for whatever reason, these guys aren't the sexy guys we want to watch.
As opposed to the 20th American on the roster who's interchangeable and isn't really a factor.
I know.
When they brought in the import rule, it was generally to up the overall level of talent, but I don't think the original intent was to have 17 out of 24 starters be Americans and all 3 quarterbacks. It's good football. I don't know why you couldn't scale that back to 12, 10, still have the Americans that enhance the game, but still have a good game, because Canadians can play. It's a prejudicial mindset on behalf of the coaches who are by and large American, and it's just it's the way they've grown up. I don't think you need that many Americans. If you reduce that, you reduce the pressures on your scouting staff to go after the Americans, and you should be minding your own country. It's the Canadian Football League. Why is that so difficult for people to grasp, and why is that notion so elusive and difficult to advance? Murr?
Well,
save the podcast right now. I'm
thinking, I'm watching. Yeah, it's a good rant, a very well put together rant, and I really
you were a college football player at a high level.
But I was never going to be good enough to play in the high level.
You still wear your helmet.
That's true. But
oh man, wow, pot meat kettle. Wow,
oh, man.
I
have nothing to say other than watching the American guys play in comparison to some of the Canadians that have come in to play the positions. The American guys are superior. And you're charging major league bucks to watch what would be arguably a Canadian product. I don't know if you can get away with that. And people aren't building $200 million stadiums to watch Canadians play football. So I think the Americans are here to stay. It's a nice dream world you're inhabiting.
But you're talking about American 11 to 20. People aren't paying to watch that.
That's true.
They're paying to watch Jordan Williams-Lambert.
Yeah.
They're paying to watch Willie Jefferson. They're not paying to watch Jacoby Cofield, just to pull a name out of a hat of an American who isn't high profile.
Yeah, I'd have to take a look at a Rider roster and go, okay, if you were to take your, 24, and move it down or whatever, okay, where would you be as far as imports? Or, I guess, internationals. But I'd be all for increasing Canadians on rosters. Not as dramatically as what you are suggesting.
Or at least they're moving in that direction.
Move the needle in the other direction. If you had another 2 or 3 Canadians, I'd be all for that. Now, where would you play them? That would be up to the coaching staffs. And as we've seen, Canadian quarterbacks aren't getting maybe that recognition that they deserve. And we obviously talk about Noah because he's right here in our backyard.
Who would have, as you pointed out in your blog, he would have completed that first touchdown pass to Roosevelt.
Yeah. Well, that's true.
Yeah. Michael O'Connor.
Bridge is a Canadian.
Yes, he is. And his performance this year, which, say what you will, I think he regressed, and I think Brandon can play in this league. I don't know why.
He showed it last year.
Yeah, I don't know why Brandon regressed, and I know people have talked about, is it the fact that Jarius Jackson wasn't there anymore? Did he not mesh with Steve Walsh? I'm not buying the Steve McAdoo thing, because Brandon Bridge flourished last year under Steve McAdoo, but something happened in the offseason. But just getting back to the...
It's a John Murphy thing. Where's the talent?
Well...
Steve McAdoo didn't have the talent he had a year ago. They didn't bring in receivers who could play.
But when I get back to Canadian quarterbacks...
Well, they did. They just took a while for them to develop.
Shaq Evans played all year and scored 0 touchdowns and led the team in receiving yards. And they keep talking about these talented young receivers they have. They're not very good aside from Williams-Lambert.
You guys are fiery.
They're lousy.
Well,
find some receivers, find a quarterback. John Murphy, it's on you.
Here's one thing. And I'm not discounting what you're saying. But the Riders were what? What did you say? It was 23 quarters? Their last 23 quarters?
No touchdown passes in 23 quarters.
Was it the Montreal game or the Toronto game where they had passing touchdowns and then it was like, no, he was down at the half-yard line.
That was the Montreal game.
And then Nick Marshall came in. So I know what you're saying. Yes, the stats show that they're not there. It's in the 20s regardless. But there were some, and they're like Shaq Evans had a touchdown taken away because he ruled down at the 6-inch line. Same with, I think it was Williams-Lambert caught one in that game. Ruled down at the 6-inch line. Yes, the stats will show that there were no touchdown passes thrown, but the ball got down there, and then it was Nick Marshall's job to finish it off. But so those numbers are skewed.
They're malleable.
But at the end of the day, Rob, you're right. Jordan Williams-Lambert was a find. Shaq Evans, to me,
wasn't the highest scoring Evans in the team.
No, he wasn't. He had his ups, he had his downs. Kyran Moore, the same thing. But now, where do these guys come back, and how do they improve their game in year 2? And that's what I want to see. And obviously, the Riders felt at the start of the year that they could get rid of Bakari Grant and Chad Owens to keep these guys here. These guys came younger, cheaper, like we've seen from Chris Jones. But now it's up for those guys. And I think you could say the same for Williams Lambert, really, even though he's could be the CFL Rookie of the Year. It's up to them to take their game to the next level. When it comes to Williams Lambert, I think he can do that. When it comes to Shaq Evans, I'm not 100% sure. Same with Kyran Moore. Those are two guys.
They're very raw.
Yeah,
especially
exactly.
Moore.
And can they improve their game? Can they take it to the next level? That's one of the questions we'll have when this team comes to camp next year.
Let's talk about next year. Now that I've gotten my rants out of the way. The receivers aren't very good, and there should be more Canadians there.
We never even touched Stephen McAdoo coming back.
Read my column today.
I know. I'll be honest with you guys.
He should be back.
He should be back. And
he's won a Grey Cup as an offensive coordinator, and they had a good offense last year. What changed? The talent.
Yeah, and don't
give him
worry
talent, give him a QB.
You have to understand that Stephen McAdoo and Bob and Chris Jones are probably best friends too. There's a real connection there. They hang out all off season. And that's saying you can't have friends, and it's not going to happen. Everyone was surprised yesterday when Chris said he's coming back. I was.
Why?
I wasn't. People on my Twitter feed were.
You wrote a whole column about it, so there must have been some sort of newsworthiness to it.
If Dickie Dunn writes it, it's got to be true.
Eh? Oh, yeah.
Slapshot.
I know, sorry. Sometimes you just catch me.
If Dickie Dunn writes it, it's got to be true.
From Slapshot.
Slapshot.
Oh, all right.
Sorry.
All right.
Sometimes he does that to you and you just say, like, where's his brain? Is it really connected to him?
He never really has had one, Murray.
Have
you not realized that from now?
Anyway, we'll stop.
It just sort of sits there like that old piece of vegetable in the fridge that sits there for like 6 months.
Well, what's that 2-year-old Chinese food in the fridge?
Well, anyway, so back to Stephen McAdoo. Him and Jones are best buddies. They hang out all season. He's kind of like his right-hand man. So I didn't think if Stephen McAdoo's not here, Jones isn't here. I think that's exact. And probably most of that staff is gone if Jones isn't here. So that's kind of is going to maintain that continuity as much as people hate it and whatnot. But
they were 12-6.
I know there's no like that's funny. I was looking at the team. We keep reminding us they were 12-6 and got a home playoff game. And the only difference is last year is they didn't get to the final. They get to Calgary on this weekend. I think people say, and they lose there. People going, yeah, okay, now it's a good season. I think
I don't know, Murray. I think because it's Calgary.
Yeah, but I'm just saying,
I know what you
having
mean.
a realistic approach.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. But I think Rider fans in the first bit they'd go, "Oh, we got beat by Calgary again." But as we sort of moved on and we got to Grey Cup, then I think it'd be like, yeah, okay, it was a great season considering they had no offense.
Rob could say 12-6. They had a home playoff game. They developed some receivers. I think we have to say that.
They took steps toward doing so.
They're running back.
Williams Lambert is good. Cannon looks like he has some potential.
And I think Evans does too. And it's not, he did get close to scoring. If he scores one touchdown, it's a whole different narrative with him, I think. And I like Kyran Moore. I think Kyran Moore is
good punt returner.
Good punt returner. And, they brought in, you can bring in the guys that brought in Lucius Purefoy, who I think was a big addition for them.
And that was a surprise for me because I thought when he came in, because I thought, you know what, he's been a guy that I wasn't sold on him in the secondaries of the BC Lions and the Ottawa Red Blacks, but he really solidified that secondary and played very well here and then surprised a lot of people with his return game.
Those returns were great. The last 2 games, he averaged 37 yards a return.
Yeah, so there's, so they did some good things, except everything's overshadowed by the biggest position on the team is a quarterback. And they thought they had one with a gamble on Zach's health last year in the offseason, and the gamble didn't pay off. Mind you, 10-4 when he was healthy and started, and he had that one big game against Calgary, so he could play. But when it came down to when they needed him, when that $430,000 contract was supposed to be there, he wasn't healthy enough to go.
Do you think Zach Collaros is back in Saskatchewan next year? Mm-hmm. And if he's not, do you think he's playing in the CFL next year? Because personally, I think with the concussion problems that he's had and the fact that he just basically accepted the fact that Chris Jones said, you're not going to play. Because I'm thinking as a pro athlete, if you're in a playoff game, you want to be out on the field with your teammates. You want to be doing that. I'm wondering if Zach Collaros has realized that the end of the road has hit. He doesn't want it to, but much like Buck Pierce, Dave Dickinson, Matt Dunnigan, the time has come for Zach Collaros to basically go back to Steubenville, Ohio, and start life after football because of a noggin that just has been beaten up too much.
I'll just make a point here. For the first time since I've ever been around the Rough Riders, the franchise quarterback wasn't around the day after the season to answer questions.
Which is telling.
I don't think Zach had fun here. I don't think we ever saw a sign of him and said, this is the kind of life I want to lead. I'm speaking for him because he didn't really would express those opinions or those feelings towards us. Zach Collaros, just, if he's back next year playing for someone, maybe hit this concussion world. But I'm like you. I'm kind of thinking he may be done with football. But
I think the Riders are done with him.
The Riders are done.
Yeah.
And then,
that didn't work.
No.
They tried, didn't work.
Yeah.
So now who's your quarterback?
Well, like Riley and Bo Levi.
That's not happening.
That's not happening.
There's that, like, and it's funny, and I sent this to someone. That model last year worked pretty well, eh? It went cheaper on quarterbacks with Kevin Glenn and Brandon Bridge, managed to get all those touchdown passes, became one play within the Grey Cup, and that model worked. Now, is there a possibility to find guys like that in the league this year, to find a cheaper alternative and maybe spend more money on your offensive line or running backs?
Well, there's probably not going to be a quarterback out there who warrants the salary that Zach Collaros
I think there
received.
are 3 guys.
So why not go back there?
I think there are 3 guys that this team can target. Jonathan Jennings, who I think is done in BC.
Who's been horrible in the last
It has been horrible, and it would have to be a reclamation project.
Yep. James
Franklin, who, of course, was the guy last year that everybody thought they could get.
But isn't he signed through 19?
Well, you can trade.
Yeah, okay.
Or Antonio Pipkin.
Yeah.
If Johnny Manziel's coming back. And no, I do not think the Saskatchewan Roughriders will make a run for Johnny Manziel, because if they do, the circus that will be created, one that Chris Jones will not tolerate, I just can't see that happening.
You need stability at that position.
Yeah, I just cannot.
That provides none of it.
I don't think Montreal's a place to be going to look for stable quarterbacking, is it?
But Pipkin showed that there could be something there. And maybe with the tutelage of Steve Walsh, maybe with the tutelage of, your OC, Steve McAdoo, maybe they can do something with Antonio Pipkin. Maybe they can't. Those are just the 3 names that really I think are out there. I know the other night on the post-game show, Travis Lulay's name came up. You need to get younger.
They're doing the same thing as Collaros.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
But Travis is a much better...
He is, but
But you sneeze on him and his shoulder falls out of the joint.
So that's not even
I think they've got to go younger. They've got to go cheaper. Those are the 3 guys right off the top of my head I think that you could target.
Unless there's negless guys.
Yeah,
they've got Austin Davis on their neg list.
Well, Trace McSorley is on that neg list.
There's that type of guy that they can nurture.
And Trace McSorley's on that neg list as well, the Penn State quarterback who's having another solid season. He's 6 foot tall, so he may be too small for the NFL. But then again, it goes back to where we started this conversation. Could Trace McSorley end up in the Alliance of American Football? Could he be an XFL guy? Now, if Trace McSorley were to come up here, I don't think you make a rookie quarterback your starting quarterback. So then, as I said, do you go with a Lulay to start mentoring a younger guy that's coming off your neg list, whether it be a McSorley or someone else? I don't know. The only guy that really knows that is Chris Jones.
What about Kevin Glenn? It worked.
Well, yeah.
He didn't put any wear and tear on his arm this year.
No, he didn't. He reminded me when I talked to him, he did play in practice. So that might be it. Can we move on a couple other things a little more exciting?
Sure.
What about this weekend?
What's more exciting than quarterbacking?
Let's talk about this weekend. A little bit.
I'm going to Saskatoon to see my godson.
Oh, cool for you. I'm going to sit home and I'm going to watch what I think are going to be a great 6 hours of CFL football. I'm excited about my Tiger Cats going to Ottawa to take on those Red Blacks and knocking them down a bit, just because I cheer for the Tiger Cats. I can do that now. And I'm thinking Calgary beats the Bombers. And I know the Bombers are rolling and they're the hottest team right now, but I think I'm leaning towards a Calgary win over the Bombers. Rob?
I agree. Winnipeg had a tough time getting past a Rider team that had no quarterbacking or offense whatsoever. So you walk into Calgary, I think the Stampeders will feed them through a shredder.
I don't think they'll feed them through a shredder, I think Calgary wins this game. And I think just Calgary will try to win this game because you're right. Winnipeg barely beat a Rider team that had no quarterback. And Winnipeg also won a football game because Andrew Harris broke tackles for whatever reason. The Calgary Stampeders are a very solid football team when it comes to making tackles. And I don't think Andrew Harris will have near the success against the Stampeders that he had against the Riders. In the Eastern Final, you know what? That's a coin flip to me. I really think, and I take a look at the quarterbacks and I go, Jeremiah Masoli's better than Trevor Harris. But I also go, that Ottawa receiving duo is a lot, or trio is a lot better than what Hamilton has right now, because all of Hamilton's receivers are hurt. And I think at the end of the day, that's probably what pushes Ottawa over the top.
I'm just going to say in one way, because we're going along here, I'm going to ask either of you guys.
We're not even half done, Murr.
What was the biggest surprise of the Rough Rider team for you this year? Just one big surprise, something that happened with the player event or something that went on. What would you, if you had to think back, make you guys scratch your heads?
You've killed our momentum. Why don't we start with you? Well, Mitch and I ponder this.
Because I love to get him in the...
Duron Carter. Yes, okay.
I still, someone asked me the other day about why they released Duron Carter, and I still don't have the definitive answers other than that. Other than they took fire after he was gone. So there was addition by subtraction. But for me, that one, and I'm going to throw a 1A when they cut everybody the day of training camp too, when they cut Bagg and they cut Owens and they cut Bakari Grant and they cut Travis Bond. Those 1 and 1A. Rob?
I was surprised. They took something that wasn't broken and they tried to fix it. Coming into the season, I thought, okay, they got Zach Collaros, who's an experienced quarterback. You've got 3 1,000-yard receivers, plus Rob Bagg, plus Chad Owens, plus Caleb Hawley, who can play. So I looked at that receiving core and I thought, they've got more able receivers than they have spots. But then you look at their composition of the receiving core as the season evolved, and it's like, what happened to that projection? Yep. There was nothing wrong with their receiving core, and they blew it up, and that was about the last explosiveness that was connected with the receiving core all year.
One thing that surprised me, the fact that Chris Jones, the mad scientist, who would put this guy in a position that he wasn't supposed to be in, like Duron Carter, or Toby Antigua, who went from defensive lineman to safety, with this season going downhill at quarterback, I'm really surprised that at some point he didn't turn to Nick Marshall and say, "You're my quarterback." Because with what he did at Auburn,
he beat Johnny Manziel at Auburn.
Nick Marshall might have been the best quarterback on the Saskatchewan Roughrider roster this year, and he never got a chance to throw a pass.
Good point. Rob?
It's so argument or a debate worth having and a point worth making. They were so depleted. Could Nick Marshall have fared much worse?
Boy, he was good
on Sunday.
And who was Nick Marshall throwing balls to at Auburn? Duke Williams.
Duke Williams, yeah, that's true. Sorry, yeah, good point.
So, I mean, that's the depths to which they've plummeted at quarterback, though, when you're thinking, okay, a cornerback might have been their best solution at that point.
And I'll just throw this at you. Where you can't recruit guys, or having a tough time recruit guys because of leagues, can you get a defensive back up here ahead of a quarterback? And if that's the case, could Chris Jones look at Nick Marshall and go, "Are you my quarterback this year?" What a story that would be going into training camp.
Oh, we were all hoping for Brandon Bridge to be the story on Sunday. And
that would have been a terrific story. I give credit to Brandon Bridge. Here's a guy who got hit in the head, had to leave the game, devastated at the end. There was Troy Fleece, a photographer, took a great picture of a very disconsolate Brandon Bridge on the sidelines.
Well, his eyes were probably still looking for Tweety birds after what had happened to him.
So all that happens, and then he speaks to the media on Tuesday, even though he's not under contract for next year. He's had a horrible game. He's faced a ton of criticism, and he got hit in the head. And he stood up there and he did that. Mm-hmm. Zach Collaros, who got paid $430,000 this year, wasn't available, apparently left town. What does that say about Brandon Bridge, the type of person he is? He didn't have to do that. There were only 3 players who spoke. He was one of them, and he spoke very well.
Marcus Thigpen would not have spoke had it not been for the fact he signed a contract extension a half an hour before the availability.
But I was really impressed with Brandon Bridge, and
too bad he didn't come through like that in the season.
But further to your point, you said we were hoping that Brandon Bridge would pan out, and I sat there listening to Brandon Bridge yesterday. I thought, or during that media conference at the end of the season, I thought, there's a guy who really deserves, just as far as being a person, somebody who really deserves for this career to pan out for him, because he didn't have to do that. That showed a lot of character and a lot of integrity. I was so impressed with the way he handled that.
I agree with you. And I think, I don't know how you two are, but I know Rod Peterson and myself at the start of the season, we said this was the time where Brandon Bridge had to put on his big boy pants and show he could play. Unfortunately for Brandon Bridge this year, I don't think that happened. I don't know if that's a product of him, the organization, whatever. But Brandon Bridge, who did not have a good game, and I think everybody walked into that stadium on Sunday hoping that Brandon Bridge would be able to turn a corner and have the game of his life to move this team forward to a Western final where would they have won Would he not have won? And would maybe Zach Collaros have been back at quarterback? We'll never know the answer to that. But I think everybody was cheering for Brandon Bridge, and everybody was sad to see him have the type of game he did.
Yeah. We're getting on to the final thoughts portion.
I thought
do we want to do a Jerry Springer type final thoughts?
Do we get to beat you up?
Be good to each other. Mur, do you have any thoughts as we reach our denouement here today?
No, I think...
Well, that's all then.
I think the Riders' season ended up the way we expected it to be. Not close, but the Riders' performance on Sunday again was what we expected out of that. We were cheering for Brandon Bridge, which we always do. We cheer for the story, and we didn't get it. And I think I'm going to look back and say Andrew Harris kind of won that game for him. I think 153 yards, 124 in the second half. He was a pretty good running back, and I hope he wins the most outstanding Canadian.
You think he'll beat Sinopoli?
Brad Sinopoli with all those catches?
Yeah, sorry, I forgot about Sinopoli. I should have remembered that.
Sinopoli should have a monopoly on that award.
Exactly. Final thoughts. It's been a lot of fun.
Save us.
At the start of the year, Craig Reynolds said that the home playoff game was an expectation. We got the home playoff game. It didn't work out the way they wanted it to. This football team was 12-6. Rough Rider football teams have a tough time winning more than 12 games. As you said, 14 is the record? I think this team is going onwards and upwards under Chris Jones. Is next year the expectation a Grey Cup appearance? I don't think that is that far out of the realm. However, with everything that's going on around the league, i.e. the American Alliance of Football and the XFL, I just feel that the Saskatchewan Roughriders and the CFL landscape as a whole will look very different by the time training camp.
You look at the trajectory of this franchise under Chris Jones, and 5 wins, 10 wins, 12 wins. Or awful. One play away from the Grey Cup home playoff game. You look at that trajectory, but now you're getting to year 4, and suddenly, can they continue with that ascent when they have to start all over at quarterback? That's the big question. I guess it ultimately all revolves around that. So let's go on for another 25 minutes about the quarterback.
Yeah. Sorry. The salary cap again. Yeah.
Mitchell Blair, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Rob.
That was
Thanks,
awesome.
Murray.
We'll see you at wrestling. December 14th at the Hungarian Club. If you'd like to join us at High Impact Wrestling.
Okay, I'll mark that on my list of things not to do.
Murray, you haven't experienced Regina at its best until you've been to High Impact
Just imagine
Wrestling.
the two of you guys watching wrestling.
You
I don't
need
think that's
refinement.
fair.
My niece goes now.
Oh, you
Take Finley.
Okay, I will. All right.
We're very Finley. We're done. Murray? Hi, Murray.
No, I'm Mitch.
Mitchell
Nice
Blair,
to meet you,
Murray
Rob.
McCormick.
Hang
Oh,
on.
we've got to read the
How about we
thing
want
at the
Mitch
end.
do this in your loudest, bestest
You got to
broadcaster
cup
radio?
your ear too,
Come
like
on,
the broadcaster that you are.
Please rate us on iTunes and leave a review. It helps us grow the podcast.
We've grown the podcast, all right.
I was gonna say,
Mitch, Murr, I'm Rob. Thanks so much for being with us, and take care.